Do you believe a price tag can kill? Imagine a ship so grand. It cost $7.5 million in 1912. That is over $200 million today. The Titanic was a floating palace of gold. It had silk rugs and crystal lights. But deep inside, a trap was waiting. Money and pride were the real architects. They built a cage of steel and ego. Why did the unsinkable ship have a secret flaw? Was the tragedy a simple accident, or was it a corporate crime? The dock in Belfast was very loud. Thousands of workers hammered red-hot metal. They built the largest moving object on Earth. It was 882 feet long. That is almost 3 football fields. The owners wanted to impress the world. They wanted the rich to feel like kings. Bruce Ismay was the boss. He was the chairman of the White Star Line. He looked at the massive steel hull. He did not see a ship. He saw a giant billboard for his company. Pride is a dangerous tool for builders. Ismay wanted more space for the rich guests. He wanted grand staircases and wide decks. The decks were for walking and talking. But there was a big problem. Lifeboats took up too much space. They looked ugly to the wealthy travelers. They blocked the view of the ocean. The ship is the lifeboat, they said. This was the first step into the trap. They traded safety for a better view. They chose beauty over survival. This choice would haunt them forever. The ship had 16 watertight compartments. These were big rooms to hold water. The engineers said 4 could flood. The ship would still stay afloat. This made people feel very brave. They felt invincible or impossible to defeat. But the walls of these rooms were short. They did not reach the ceiling. This was a secret cost-cutting measure. It saved weight and saved money. The Unsinkable label was a marketing lie. It was a shield for bad design. A tiny detail was missing at the start. The lookouts did not have binoculars. Binoculars are glasses for seeing far away. The glasses were locked in a cabinet. The key was with an officer. That officer was moved to another ship. He forgot to leave the key behind. No one wanted to break the lock. It was a small, cheap mistake. But in the dark, eyes are not enough. This small missing item was a ticking clock. The trap was now set for the sea. The Titanic left the harbor with great noise. Smoke poured from 3 giant black funnels. The 4th funnel was actually a fake. It was only there for decoration. The owners thought 4 funnels looked powerful. They wanted the ship to look balanced. Even the smoke was part of the show. Luxury was the only language they spoke. On the upper decks, tea was served. The cups were made of fine-bone china. The air smelled of expensive cigars. But below the water, the steel was cold. The ship used 3 million iron rivets. Rivets are the metal pins holding plates. The engineers used high-quality steel rivets, but they only used them in the middle. For the bow, they used iron rivets. Bow means the front of the ship. Iron is cheaper and much weaker. It has too much slag or waste material. This makes the iron brittle and easy to break. They saved money on the most important part. Captain Edward Smith was a famous man. He was the millionaire's captain. The rich passengers loved his calm face. He was planning to retire very soon. This was his final, glorious voyage. He felt the pressure of the company. Ismay was on the ship with him. Ismay wanted to break a speed record. He wanted the headlines to scream, "Fastest." A fast ship meant more tickets sold. Profit was driving the engines faster and faster. The engines were massive and very hot. Men shoveled coal into the orange fires. They worked in the dark, dusty belly. They were the black gang of workers. They did not see the silk rugs. They only felt the heat and vibration. The ship moved at 22 knots. This is very fast for a giant ship. The vibrations shook the crystal chandeliers upstairs. The rich passengers laughed and drank wine. They did not know the steel was screaming. The sea was like a dark mirror. There were no waves to splash ice. Icebergs are hard to see without waves. The water was freezing, near 32 degrees. Warnings started coming in over the radio. Other ships saw giant walls of ice. The telegraph operators were very busy. They were sending messages for the rich. "Tell my family I am fine," they wrote. The ice warnings were buried under social chatter. The pride of the ship ignored the sea. The night of April 14th was silent. The air was sharp like a knife. Inside the first-class dining room, laughter rang. Men wore tuxedos and women wore diamonds. They felt safe inside their steel castle. They trusted the unsinkable promise. They trusted the expensive price of their tickets. But the ocean does not care about money. The ocean only knows physics and force. The Titanic was moving way too fast. It was a bullet made of brittle iron. Lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee watched. They stood in the High Crow's nest. Their eyes ached from the cold wind. They still had no binoculars to help. Suddenly, Fleet saw a dark shadow ahead. It was blacker than the night sky. It grew larger every second. It was a mountain of ancient ice. He rang the bell 3 loud times. "Iceberg, right ahead," he shouted into the phone. The bridge received the call with a shock. First Officer Murdoch saw the white ghost. He had only seconds to make a choice. "Hard, a starboard," he commanded the helmsman. He also ordered the engines to reverse. This was a logical but fatal mistake. Reversing the engines made the rudder weak. The rudder is the fin that turns ships. The Titanic turned slowly, like a tired giant. The bow missed the main iceberg peak, but the ice reached out under the water. It was a jagged, hidden blade. The impact was not a loud crash. It was a long, grinding sound. It felt like a giant zipper opening. The iceberg brushed against the starboard side. Starboard means the right side of the ship. It popped the cheap iron rivets out. The steel plates buckled and separated easily. Water rushed into the first 5 compartments. The unsinkable ship was now wide open. The sea was pouring in at high pressure. The trap had finally snapped shut. In the boiler rooms, men ran for life. The cold water was green and violent. They tried to close the heavy doors. The ship began to tilt slightly forward. Most passengers did not feel the hit. Some saw ice shavings on the deck. They played with the ice like toys. They did not know death was inside. They thought the ship was just resting. The band played soft music in the hall. The illusion of safety was still very strong. Thomas Andrews was the ship's head designer. He carried the blue maps of the ship. He walked down to the flooding lower decks. He saw the water rising over the walls. He did the math in his head. 5 compartments were full of the heavy sea. The front of the ship was getting heavy. It would pull the bow down deep. This would tilt the ship even more. The water would pour over the short walls. It was like an ice cube tray. Andrews went to the bridge to talk. His face was pale and very sad. "The ship will sink," he told Smith. Captain Smith was shocked and went silent. "How long?" the captain asked with fear. "1 hour, maybe 2, Andrews replied quietly. The math was certain and very cruel. There were 2,200 people on the ship, but there were only lifeboats for 1,178. The company's pride had signed a death warrant. Half of the people were already dead. The distress calls went out into the dark. CQD and SOS flew through the air. The Titanic was crying for help now. The Carpathia heard the call, but was far. It would take 4 hours to arrive. Another ship, the Californian, was much closer. It was only 10 miles away from them, but its radio operator was fast asleep. Its captain saw the Titanic's bright lights. He thought they were just having a party. He ignored the white flares in the sky. On the deck, the confusion started to grow. Crew members uncovered the small wooden boats. They told people to put on life belts. A life belt is a vest that floats. People laughed because the vest felt bulky. They did not want to leave the warm ship. The dark water looked cold and terrifying. "Women and children first," the officers yelled. Many wives refused to leave their husbands. They stayed on the deck to face the end. The first lifeboat lowered into the dark. It had capacity for 65 people, but it left with only 28 inside. The officers were afraid the ropes would break. They did not trust the equipment they had. Pride was replaced by a frantic panic. The ship's band moved to the deck. They played upbeat ragtime music to stay calm. The music masked the sound of the water. Below the surface, the ship was dying fast. The luxury was drowning in the salt. The tilt of the ship became steep. The bow was deep under the waves. The stern, or the back, rose up. The golden lights were still shining bright. They flickered as the salt touched the wires. In the third-class decks, it was chaos. The poor passengers were trapped behind gates. They did not know where the boats were. The maze of the ship became a tomb. Money had bought the first-class guests a chance. The poor were left to the rising tide. By 2 a.m., the water reached the bridge. Captain Smith stood alone in the dark. He had failed his ship and his passengers. The last lifeboat had rowed far away. Hundreds of people crowded the high stern. They climbed the railings like frantic ants. The ship groaned like a wounded animal. The stress on the middle was too much. The steel could not hold the weight. Suddenly, a sound like a gunshot rang out. The Titanic was breaking in two pieces. The hull snapped between the third funnel. The front half pulled back down. Then, the two parts ripped apart completely. The bow sank fast into the black abyss. The stern fell back flat on the water. People thought they might be safe now. But then the stern tilted up again. It stood vertical, pointing at the cold stars. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, the sea swallowed the rest of the ship. The unsinkable palace was gone forever. The silence after the sinking was worse. Then, the screaming began in the water. 1,500 people were floating in the ice. The water was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. This is colder than a block of ice. It felt like 1,000 needles stabbing. The lifeboats stayed far away in the dark. They were afraid the drowning would flip them. Only one boat went back to help. They found only a few people still alive. The rest were silent, frozen statues. The Carpathia arrived when the sun rose. The ocean was empty and very blue. White icebergs sat on the calm horizon. 705 survivors sat in the small boats. They were covered in blankets and grief. They looked back at the empty water. The world's greatest ship was a memory. The gold and the silk were gone. The iron rivets had failed their master. The trap was empty, and the cost was paid. Thousands of lives were traded for pride. The news hit New York like a bomb. The public was angry and very confused. How can a new ship just vanish? Investigations began in London and America. They found the truth about the lifeboats. They found the truth about the bad iron. Bruce Ismay survived the sinking ship. He was called a coward by the world. He lived the rest of his life in shame. The man who wanted glory found only hate. The corporate trap had caught him too. New laws were made because of this. Every ship must have enough lifeboats now. Radios must stay on for 24 hours. This changed the history of the sea forever. But the cost was too high to pay. The Titanic sits 2 miles deep now. It is rusting in the dark and cold. The unsinkable steel is being eaten by bacteria. It will disappear completely in a few years. Only the story of the Pride will remain. Scientists recently looked at the ship's rivets. They found they were full of weak slag. If the rivets were steel, she might float. If the ship hit the ice head-on, she might float. But the turn and the iron were fatal. It was a chain of small, greedy choices. Each choice saved a penny but cost a life. The unsinkable ship was a house of cards. It fell because it was built on lies. The ocean always finds the truth eventually. Even today, We build giant things for status. We trust technology to keep us safe. We think we are faster than nature's grip. But the Titanic is a permanent warning. It tells us that pride is very heavy. It tells us that money has no breath. When the water rises, we are all equal. The ship is a ghost of our arrogance. It waits in the dark for us to remember. We must never trust a label over logic. Was the Titanic the only ship like this? Are there traps in the things we build today? We look at the stars and the deep sea. We feel like we own the whole world. But remember the key in the locked cabinet. Remember the short walls in the dark hull. Remember the music playing on the slanted deck. The ocean is still cold and very deep. What other secrets are hiding in the waves? Are we building another unsinkable dream right now? Would you like me to tell you about the sister ship that almost met the same fate?